So, can you tell me about what the what role chalking had on campus when you first got to Wesleyan?
Sure, it was used sometimes to advertise events on campus, but it was more so used several times during the academic year to um, queer the space.
Mm-hmm.
Students would usually sometime around October 11th, which is coming out day, they would chalk, pretty much all over campus, um, queer messages and so forth. And then that would usually happen again sometime like mid-April near Westfest. Um, and those were the two kind of, biggest annual, semi-annual, I guess, chalkings. And then other times, there would be like just advertisements about, events happening, concerts and lectures and stuff like that. But that was pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm. And at what point, to your knowledge, um, was there like displeasure among administrators about chalking on campus?
Well, there were always. I mean, during the whole time that I was here, there were always complaints by
Mm-hmm.
some students, by non-Wesleyan people who were visiting the campus, by some faculty members and some staff members. There were always complaints about some of the content, especially around the queer chalking. People didn't usually object to, um, advertisements about things, but about some of the content, there were always complaints about that. Some complaints about that, and those I think increased. It seems to me, this is just my narrative, but it seems to me um, that over time, the messages that were chalked, kind of like pushing the envelope more and more. There was an increasing tendency to direct the chalkings at specific individuals,
Mm-hmm.
um, and or organizations on campus, and so it felt in some ways like they became a mechanism of personal attack. Um, and so as that happened slowly over several years, I think that the complaints kind of increased.
And what was were you did you have the same job on campus as you do now?
I was dean of students
You were
then.
dean of
Yep,
students. Okay.
yep.
Um, and what were the events specifically leading up to the moratorium? Were you involved in those discussions to implement that, or?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the decision for the moratorium was really the president's, and what kind of the pathway that led us there was, so we had an increasing number of complaints coming in, and
Mm-hmm.
we tried a bunch of different things. So our former director of affirmative action was a woman by the name of Catherine Friedman,
Mm-hmm.
and she and I would often talk with the president and the rest of the cabinet about, about chalking and so forth, the complaints that were coming in from various segments of the community and from visitors. And we first got into, uh, uh, I guess, methodology of having, if somebody had a complaint, if a complaint came in about particular messages, then there was a team of people who, and including myself, who would go and like look at whatever the content was, and try to come to some sort of decision about whether or not it should stay or it should be erased.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a horrible position to be in. And really difficult and complicated. So we tried that through a couple cycles of chalking, and it was typically Catherine Friedman, myself, and then some student in a leadership position on the WSA would form the team, and then we would go and like look at the different areas where we had gotten complaints and kind of make decisions about if there were if a quote-unquote reasonable person, whatever that means, would find, something like offensive, then, we would kind of lean towards having it erased. And, if the group of us thought, well, this is like, political and some people may be uncomfortable with it, but we don't really think that it's offensive, then we would let it stay. So as you can imagine, this is like a job that none of us liked, and it just felt gross, honestly. So we tried that for a while, and the content, as I said before, kind of continued in this direction of naming more individuals, and so those individuals would complain. So it wasn't just the person who was offended by I don't know, the sex positivity of some of the content, but the number of complaints increased over time because specific people, departments, organizations, and so forth were being named. So eventually what happened, Zach, was right as the moratorium was, I think the triggering factor for the moratorium was that the president's, or the affirmative, it was either the Affirmative Action Office or the president's office received a complaint, a formal complaint from some staff employees that the chalking that they were subjected to, at least twice per year on their way into work really constituted a hostile work environment. And so then the president and the Affirmative Action Office felt like they had to take some sort of action to resolve that. Because people couldn't get to their workplace without kind of walking over this stuff. And it'd be, at the time they were thinking that it's comparable to, me saying somebody's like posting like, porn or something like on my door. I can't get into my office without being exposed to it, and if that creates a hostile environment for me, then you as an employer have to do something to resolve that. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like the catalyst that got us into the moratorium. And I remember President Bennett saying, I feel like I remember him saying he felt that we needed to just take a break and have no chalking and kind of take a step back and see if there were ways that the community could agree, some guidelines, I guess, is what he was after. And so the moratorium was declared. The WSA, I had many groups, many meetings with students, with the WSA, and so forth, where kind of we talked about what the issues were. We talked about, some proposed guidelines. I mean, there were, we talked about, can we designate a certain place on campus where, chalking can happen? Could we find a way so that it's not anonymous speech, so that people could be held accountable for their speech? Like, could we come up with a community norm that you would have to sign your chalking? But that understandably didn't work for, some queer students who weren't out, but, for whom it was empowering to chalk queer messages and so forth. So, we really talked about a whole bunch of ideas. The WSA, I think, developed maybe two. I don't know if the WSA records are such that you could find proposals in their records.
There is a lot archived on the Hermes website, actually.
Oh, okay. So, anyways, there were several proposals, I think, that went to the president to consider, mm-hmm. And he felt, I think when he announced the permanent ban, he wrote an email that you can probably dig up somewhere. I'm not sure if I have it, but I'll look after our meeting. that said, we've tried this, we've tried that. The WSA has worked hard on this. I'm not convinced that we can find a way to do this in a satisfactory way. So, I'm just gonna, ban the practice. And that's kind of where we've been, ever since. You remember last year that